All right, let's get into our first topic now then. And should the public be given a vote on assisted dying? 0207 862 2222. Let us know what you think about this. So MPs will vote on the proposed law change on Friday, with suggestions today actually that it has enough support to pass. However, senior government ministers have been publicly divided on the issue, with both the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary voicing their concerns. But should this just be an issue for politicians, or should we get a say too? Now, according to a recent YouGov poll, almost 3/4 of Brits say that they would support making assisted dying legal in the UK. Albie and Susan will get your thoughts in just a moment, but now I want to introduce you to palliative care consultant. This is Dr. Matthew Dore. Matthew, where do you stand on this?
So I stand against legalisation of assisted dying. And the reasons are that, as this law, a private member's bill going through very quickly, demonstrates, is there's no real safeguards there for vulnerable and people who feel a burden. And that is our group of patients. The Association of Palliative Medicine of Great Britain and Ireland are opposed to it because we see those patients. Our patients are within that circle of eligibility. And we know that those patients there's some which will not want to go to a nursing home, for instance, and rather give the money to their kids. Or there's coercive families, or there's situations in which I really, really worry that the people will avail of this earlier than they need to. A good example is actually the strongest proponent, Esther Ranson. God bless her, but she was diagnosed 21 months ago, I think it is, with stage 4 lung cancer. She was given less than 6 months. So she would have fulfilled the criteria 21 months ago. And therefore, my question is, how many people in the similar situation to Esther Ranson would have accessed this and not got the Christmas I hope she gets another Christmas she got, and seen the bulbs bloom and all those things. So the question really comes down to how many incorrect deaths, those early ones, justify the right for assisted dying. And I think that risk is skewed.
Susan, misdiagnosis is quite worrying when it comes to assisted dying.
Maybe. First thing I'd just like to say, I know you work in palliative care, and I actually think I completely understand your point of view, and I think it's excellent that we have people like you during this debate talking about all those things, because all the things you raised need to be talked about. We need to examine the fact that, could this be abused? What are the safeguarding issues and everything else? So people like you talking about that is exactly what we need in this debate. But we must have this debate, because it isn't right that we let people suffer at the end of their life for too long and too much. And I speak as somebody who watched somebody do that. So I have two experiences. One was watching somebody who had cancer die in pain and terribly over a long period of time. They were in a hospice. I don't feel the care that they had was correct, because they shouldn't have been suffering as much as they were, but maybe, well, I presume they were doing everything they could, but they couldn't do anything to stop that. And I watched that man, a big proud man, suffer horribly. And I don't think that's right. We wouldn't allow that if it was our pet. We say, oh no, we wouldn't let it suffer. But we do it to people because of the sanctity of life, which is a sanctity, and I agree with that, but you can't make people suffer in that way. Also, 5 years ago, my husband was given 6 months to live in a diagnosis when he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and we lived for a couple of weeks thinking there was going to be no treatment or anything else. He then had a form of chemotherapy, which he responded to, and having gone through that, never at that point of the diagnosis, and I don't think it's fair to talk for Esther Ranson in that way either. Yes, she was diagnosed and told, you have 6 months to live. But I don't think she was thinking about the assisted dying at that point in the same way. But I can't speak for her. I don't think anybody should. She has obviously come to the points of view she's come to over a period of time. But what you deal with then is you're in that situation. You don't suddenly think, oh, well, that's it, I'm going to kill myself. I don't think that's how it works. But what is important is this debate is on the table, that we have that debate. I think if we did put a vote out to the public, so many people, and I think Albie's got something similar that you're going to talk about, I've had an experience of watching somebody suffer it can't be in civilised society that we allow that to happen.
Well,
it needs looking at.
I suppose that's why we're asking as well, is this just for MPs to be voting on this, or actually should we all have a vote on this? Because as you've rightly pointed out, death is something that will affect all of us, but has affected many of us in different ways, Albie.
So to answer your question directly, yes, I do think the public should have a say on this. I would certainly be in favour of a referendum on it for the very reason, for the debate that we've just been discussing now. Now, I happen to agree more with Susan. I support assisted dying for many of the reasons that Susan says. But ultimately, I think these moral and ethical debates that are very personal to people, a lot of them are based on people's experiences. We've just heard experiences from a palliative care doctor and the experiences of someone who has seen a loved one go through the awful thing that happens at the end of life. And I think actually we need to have a much more open culture about death in the UK. I find it difficult to speak about death. I think lots of us find it difficult to speak about death. When my mother speaks about what she wants to happen when she dies, I find it very uncomfortable. But she always says, well, Albert, I'm going to die one day and you're going to have to face up to this. So we need to have this conversation now, so when it happens, you know what I want to happen. And ultimately, what this question of assisted dying is about what people want to happen at the end of their lives. And it's something we need to be a lot more comfortable discussing. Both sides of the argument, we need to have it out and talk about it. And I think my concern with it just being something that MPs are discussing and just kind of something that the commentariat discusses is it's just this small group of people that somehow represent the views of the United Kingdom. And actually quite often I think politicians can get it wrong.
But Matthew, do you think that actually giving it out to the general public might mean that we have an emotional response rather than perhaps a more considered response looking at unintended consequences of this?
No, I agree. I think going to the public would be much better than the current setup of private members' bill, which is being rushed through, and there's going to be limited time for debate, limited amendments. The laws don't get a huge amount of say. It's all being, and it wasn't even on the Labour manifesto. Because the debate's much wider. What are we doing about palliative care, which is 37% funded by the government, majority funded by charity. The NHS is supposed to be cradle to grave, but we're not doing that grave bit at all. Now, in terms of going to the polls, I know Dignity and Dying have about 80%, then another poll was about 70%. The most recent poll is 60% of the population support it. And underneath that, this is the King's Fund, it outlines 70% of those people are worried about people being pressurised or a burden, which is exactly my point. So there's loads. So I think as people explore this and as public knowledge grows, I completely agree we should be talking about dying. It's something we've lost through our generations, actually, because we hide it away. It's become clinical rather than the family natural thing that it actually is.
When we talk about coercive behaviour and putting pressure on loved ones to take this option, that's something that you're worried about. Are you mostly worried about a sort of overt pressure, or maybe I'm thinking what might be more common is somebody taking it upon themselves not to want to be a burden on their children, because it kind of goes against a parental desire, isn't it? You never want to put pressure on your children. It's always you take the burden from them.
You're absolutely right, Storm. There's two. There's the bad people, coercion, getting money and will and things. They exist. We can't ignore that. And there's also this burden on people. Now, in Oregon, the data is 46% access their assisted dying in Oregon because they feel a burden on family and friends. That's their own data from Oregon, 46%. So you've got this situation where people feel, well, actually, it's better to hand over to my younger generations. And how often do you hear a lady in a nursing home say, I don't want to be a nuisance?
Yeah.
What percentage of deaths in Oregon are as a result of assisted dying?
I think it's I can't remember exactly, but you probably know more. I think it's around 5%, but I'm not certain exactly of the.
So less than 2.5% of the deaths in the whole of Oregon are because people feel that they're a burden on their families.
So if you look at all the jurisdictions, every jurisdiction which legalised this, their numbers go up and up and up. None of them have plateaued at all. Now, I think it's around 11% in Montreal, in Quebec, and that was legalized in 2016. Oregon is actually really very sparsely populated, but small population, really. But the numbers just keep going up. In Netherlands, they keep going up. And all the restrictions, all these safeguards, there are no safeguards in this bill, none regarding looking at burden.
But we're not there yet with it. And that is if we take it off the table and don't talk about it, it'll never get there. I do think we have to keep it moving through. So we can, and we do need to listen to you about...
It's a private members' bill.
But yes, but we still, we can't just kind of stop talking about it and take it off the table.
OK, I just want to go to the calls. David from Dorset, how do you feel on this? Do you think it should go out to a public vote?
Well, I think it ought to, yes. I've got mixed feelings about it, in all honesty.
OK, so do you think the public would vote in favour of the assisted dying bill as it is going through on Friday, or do you think that people might want to take a bit more time to consider it?
I think people will probably want to take more time to consider it because it is such a final solution idea that that I don't actually hold with.
What's your biggest concern then, David?
I was given 6 months to live in April of 2021 by my own GP, and I'm still here now.
Okay, which is actually one of the main problems that Matthew brought up very early on in this conversation. But I suppose just because you are given 6 months to live doesn't mean then you sign the letter saying,
it doesn't mean
right,
that.
I want a doctor to come in and assist me in dying. It just means that maybe that's an option that you can start to think about. And I'm actually not sure how this works. But if you do fulfil all the criteria that is in this bill, you get 6 months to live and you say, OK, I want to sign up to be able to have assisted dying. Can you say when that has to go into place? So when I lose the ability to do this, I want to have assisted dying. When I lose the ability to do this, when I give you the nod, I want it there. You don't have to take it straight away, do you?
So a few things. In the bill, I can't refuse onward referral. So if you ask me I want to kill myself, I cannot refuse onward referral. And there's no provision in the bill for me to explore why you're asking that. Now, what will happen is palliative care, you'll ask me something like that, and I will want to explore it. But how much exploration am I allowed before I'm seen as obstructing your access to a service? Furthermore, the bill also states I can suggest it. A doctor can suggest to you that maybe it's better off if you're dead. How terrifying is that?
Can a doctor not now suggest to someone, if they want an extra round of chemotherapy, and I have a family friend that went through this last year, can a doctor not suggest to them, actually, I recommend you don't have that round of chemotherapy because it's not going to be very effective, and it might be very effective and extend their lives. Can a doctor not actually suggest you'd be better off not having this treatment, even if the patient wants it?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the situation you just posed, where a doctor is making a suggestion, and a doctor making a suggestion in the situation that I've just outlined?
Well, suggesting sort of withdrawing chemotherapy because it's not effective, even if it's effective...
Leading to a quicker death.
Even if it's effective, it's your right to choose. But the fact I, as a doctor, can plant a seed in your mind, have you thought about this? And there's different thresholds with all the doctors. Some doctors will be very quick to suggest it, other ones won't want to do it at all, and there's people in the middle.
So if doctors couldn't suggest it, would you support the bill?
No, I don't support the bill for many, many reasons.
Are there any circumstances where you would support it?
In this bill, not a single... It is absolutely going through rapidly with minimal critique, and as people have discovered through the media, there is so many problems with it.
All right, I want to go back to the calls. Helen from West Glamorgan, how do you feel about, I suppose, the speed in which this bill might be passing, but also the thought of maybe having a public vote on it?
Firstly, Stormy, you're looking lovely, and congratulations on your pregnancy.
Thank you very much, thank you.
I watch your show daily. I'm 100% in support of it. I am a patient who has terminal lung cancer. I have been living well with terminal lung cancer for 4 years. I've just had my fourth cancerversary, should we call it.
Okay. And have you been given a time frame for this? That's such a horrible question to ask. I'm sorry to ask it, Helen, but...
I've been given 2. and I've outlived both.
Okay. Well, I mean, fabulous, and congratulations, Helen. But when that time comes, do you think you'll know when the time comes when you will, this might be an option that you would take up?
Yes, 100%. I don't want to die in pain. Palliative care. I have palliative care on board at the moment to help with my pain management. There's going to come a time where I am end of life and will need the end of life side of palliative care, because palliative care are not just there for immediate end of life care. They help manage symptoms too. Okay. And yeah, I don't want to die in excruciating pain. Sometimes it's difficult to get into hospices when you are end of life and you have to wait for a bed, and then you have what they call palliative care at home. Mm-hmm. Now, my argument is the NHS, or the powers that be, the health boards, when you were diagnosed with lung cancer in particular, a DNR is put in place. That's do not resuscitate. Now, I understand the reasons behind that, because if I was resuscitated, my lungs would collapse with already fragile lungs and I would be in excruciating pain.
I've got you, that makes sense. I didn't actually know that, Helen, so I learnt something there. Oh, okay, go on.
If I was resuscitated by somebody that didn't know I had lung cancer, where would that fare me then? The excruciating pain. Lung cancer, is a horrible death.
So the concern is obviously coercion. The main concern for a lot of people is coercion and people feeling like a burden and wanting to go. But actually, when it comes to excruciating pain, we do get lots of callers calling up saying their mum was starving themselves for a week. People wanting to pass. Helen doesn't want to be in pain. Would you say, as a palliative care doctor, that there's ever a situation where there's no other option but to be in pain when the time comes?
So I'm sorry to hear all these stories. The pain is generally very well managed. And I'm sorry that sometimes that hasn't happened. Again, charity funded, and it's not in the NHS, all those things. There is a misconception, though. There's a real deep misconception that dying in of itself is painful and suffering.
I've seen it as well. So I understand what you're saying, and I wouldn't want to alarm people who are watching this, who may have been diagnosed with things or who have got friends and family suffering from it. But when you have watched somebody, and I understand what you're saying, it shouldn't. And even in the hospital, the hospice, they said to me, "Oh, well, we're trying to get it under control, but he is dying. So this is what happens. It is what happens to people, and we have to face that reality."
Okay, but are you saying, actually, as a palliative care doctor, Matthew, that it shouldn't happen, that people should not be in pain?
But that is no comfort to somebody who is stood there watching it.
Blame the care, don't change the law.
But I will just say, look, you said, generally speaking, death doesn't have to be painful. That's a general statement. You said generally speaking. You know as well as I do, there are some pains, there are some deaths that are extremely painful. And I watched a very close friend of mine die about this time last year, and she was in excruciating pain. There was absolutely nothing anyone could do for her. She had cancer and she was in so much pain. About a week before she died, she actually tried to throw herself out of a window. Oh. Now, that is not a situation I would wish anyone to be in. And I would have loved in that situation, for her to be able to have a more dignified, pain-free end to her life. And I've got another family friend who is making preparations to go to Dignitas abroad. And it breaks my heart that she doesn't have access to a service like that in this country. I take the point about the concerns that people have about people being coerced and vulnerable people. But why should that stop someone who is of sound mind making a decision about the end of their life?
Because this bill kills people preemptive. It doesn't solve that problem. Because the way the bill's managed, it's preemptive of any very, very, very rare bad death.
But okay, it's not that rare if you've been through it.
I'm going to have to draw this conversation to a close, although there's so much more we could discuss.